The Zovak Empire was one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. With their massive fleet and advanced technology, they had conquered countless worlds, destroying anyone who dared to stand in their way. Their warships were enormous, equipped with weapons that could wipe out entire cities with a single shot. The Zovak were proud of their strength, and they believed no one could challenge them. So, when the transmission arrived from Earth, the Zovak leaders didn't take it seriously. The message was simple but full of defiance. A single human soldier was speaking, claiming that humanity would never back down from a fight, even against an enemy as powerful as the Zovak. The transmission was laughable, a joke to the mighty. Zovak warlords. Look, who's here to conquer us? One of the Zovak generals, Commander Vector, chuckled as he read the message. A single human soldier? How amusing. His fellow commanders laughed along with him. They had never heard of such a thing before. The humans, a species that had only just begun to explore space, thought they could defeat the Zovak. It was a laughable idea. Vector turned to his officers. Prepare the fleet. Let's show these humans what happens when they challenge the might of the Zovak Empire. The Zovak's laughter echoed through the halls of their warship, but there was something else in their eyes: confidence. They had never faced a real threat. They believed that no one could match their power. Back on Earth, however, things were different. The human soldier who had sent the transmission, Sergeant Ethan Hayes, was not laughing. He had no fleet, no giant warships. He was just one man, commanding a single ship. But he had something that the Zovak didn't: human determination. Ethan stood on the deck of his ship, the Resolute, a small, aging vessel that had seen better days. It was nothing compared to the massive Zovak warships, but it was all he had. The ship had been retrofitted with human technology, much of it outdated by galactic standards. But the humans were experts at making the most of what they had. This is our time, Ethan muttered to himself. We may not be the strongest, but we'll make them remember us. His crew, a small group of soldiers and engineers, shared his belief. They were a mix of different backgrounds from every corner of Earth. Some were veterans, others were young recruits. But they all had one thing in common: an unshakable loyalty to humanity and to each other. The Resolute was no match for the Zovak in terms of firepower or size, but Ethan knew that in a battle of wits and strategy, humans had the advantage. They were creative, quick-thinking, and unpredictable. They didn't fight like the Zovak did. They fought with heart. With a deep sense of purpose, Ethan's mission was clear: to show the galaxy that humanity would not be intimidated by alien forces. He wasn't here to conquer. He was here to survive, and to make sure the Zovak understood that no one could push humans around. As the Resolute left Earth's atmosphere, the crew prepared for the unknown. They knew the Zovak would be coming, and they knew the odds were against them. But the humans had one thing the Zovak didn't: they had each other. Meanwhile, the Zovak fleet was already on the move. Hundreds of warships, all larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever built, were heading toward Earth. The Zovak commanders were eager to crush human threat and prove once again that they were the dominant force in the galaxy. But they underestimated the humans. The Zovak's arrogance blinded them to the one thing that made humans dangerous: their unyielding spirit. "Target Earth," Vector ordered, his voice full of disdain. "Let's finish this quickly." The Zovak fleet's engines roared as they sped toward their target. Each warship was equipped with weapons capable of destroying entire cities, and the Zovak believed it would be an easy victory. They had no idea what awaited them. Back on the Resolute, Ethan and his crew prepared for the worst. They knew the Zovak would arrive soon, and they had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead. No, they weren't planning to fight the Zovak head-on. They knew that would be suicide. Instead, they would rely on their ingenuity, their resourcefulness, and their ability to adapt. Ethan stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars. "We've got one shot at this," he said quietly. "We're not going down without a fight. We may be small, but we're not helpless." His crew nodded in agreement. They were ready. No matter what happened, they would fight with everything they had. The first sign that the Zovak were near came as a bright flash in the distance. Ethan's heart raced. The Zovac fleet was arriving. "It's time," Ethan said. "Brace yourselves." The crew took their positions as the Zovac fleet closed in. The size of the enemy ships was intimidating, but Ethan kept his focus. The Resolute was no match for the Zovac's firepower, but it wasn't about firepower. It was about strategy. Ethan had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only chance they had. He would use the Zovac's overconfidence against them. While the Zovac were busy thinking they were unbeatable, humans would strike where it hurt the most at their pride. The Zovac fleet was now in range. Their weapons powered up, ready to unleash destruction on Earth. But the humans weren't afraid. They had something the Zovac didn't: hope and the will to fight for survival. "Let's show them," Ethan said, as he gave the order to engage. The battle had begun, and the Zovac were about to learn the hard way that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. This is a simple and engaging start to the story, focusing on the setup of the conflict and the human soldier's determination. It sets the stage for the upcoming confrontation while highlighting the difference between the Zovac's arrogance and humanity's unyielding spirit. The Zovac Empire's fleet approached Earth at full speed. Hundreds of warships, each larger and stronger than anything humanity had ever seen, blotted out the stars as they advanced. The commanders of the fleet were confident in their victory. After all, they had destroyed entire civilizations with ease. What could a single human soldier in a tiny ship possibly do to them? But on Earth, inside the aging ship, the Resolute Sergeant Ethan Hayes was preparing for the impossible. The humans didn't have the advantage of size or firepower, but they had something far more valuable: determination and creativity. "Status report," Ethan called out, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Shields are up, Captain," said Lieutenant Margot, his second in command. "The engines are stable, but we're running at half power. We'll need to outsmart them if we want to survive." Ethan nodded. It was a tough situation, but he had faith in his crew. They weren't just soldiers, they were thinkers, problem solvers. They'd faced challenges before, just never one this big. "All right," Ethan said, turning toward the holographic display in the center of the command room. "Here's what we know. The Zovac think they're invincible. They'll come at us with everything they've got, expecting us to run or surrender. But we're not doing either. We're going to give them a fight they've never seen." The crew listened carefully. Ethan had been through countless missions, but this was something different. This was about survival. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity wasn't something to be written off. "We need to use our size to our advantage," Ethan continued. "The Resolute may not be a battleship, but we know these ships better than they know ours. We've got the element of surprise." Behind him, Lieutenant Margot worked quickly on the controls. "I've been running simulations on their fleet movements," she said. "We can't fight them head-to-head, but we can outmaneuver them. Their ships are huge, but they're not built for agility. We can move in close, hit them fast, and get out before they can retaliate." Ethan turned toward the tactical officer. "Corporal Sarah Diaz, what's the status of their fleet?" Sarah studied the screen carefully. "Their lead ship, the Vector Prime, is their flagship. It's a fortress. But the rest of their fleet is divided into smaller groups. They're probably overconfident, which works in our favor." Ethan smiled slightly. "We'll use that to our advantage. Let's make them think we're weaker than we are. They'll underestimate us, and that's when we strike." The crew nodded, each of them aware that this mission would require more than just military skill. It would take courage, creativity, and teamwork. They were outgunned, but they weren't out of options. As the Zovac fleet neared Earth, Ethan's team continued to prepare. The humans knew their best chance was to avoid direct confrontation. The Zovac might have firepower, but the humans had the advantage of speed and surprise. The Resolute wasn't built to last in a prolonged battle, but it could slip in and out of the enemy's defenses before they even realized what was happening. "Get ready, everyone," Ethan said. "Once we're in range, we move fast, hit the smaller ships first, disrupt their communications, and then disappear into the asteroid belt. Can't take them all on, but we can slow them down." As the Resolute powered toward the enemy fleet, The crew members worked in quiet determination. There was no room for fear. They knew what was at stake, not just their lives, but the future of Earth itself. Ethan moved to the communications station. "Prepare a message for Earth Command," he ordered. "Let them know we're about to engage the enemy. We may not make it, but we're going to show them the human spirit is not so easily broken." The crew worked quickly, and the message was sent. Ethan knew it might be their last communication. If things went wrong, Earth would never know what had happened to them. But if they succeeded, they'd have made history. They'd have proven that the Zovak could be defeated, that humanity wasn't just a species to be ignored. Meanwhile, aboard the Zovak flagship, Commander Vector was growing impatient. His fleet was nearing Earth's atmosphere, and he was eager to crush this human threat once and for all. "They think they can fight us with one ship," Vector sneered. "How foolish." Attention, as he paced. "Ready. The weapons," he ordered. "Once we reach Earth, we will obliterate anything in our path. No mercy for these insolent creatures." But as the Zovak fleet approached Earth, they began to notice something strange. The human ship, the Resolute, had disappeared from their radar. At first, they thought it was a mistake, but then they realized there was no sign of the small ship at all. Vector's eyes narrowed. Where did it go? On the bridge of the Resolute, Ethan stood at the helm, watching the empty space before him. The Zovak were right where they wanted them, unaware of the trap that was about to spring on them. But they were not the only ones who could disappear into the stars. The humans had the perfect hiding place, the asteroid belt. "Now," Ethan whispered, "let's do this." The Resolute darted toward the asteroid field, sensors picking out the perfect route through the dense collection of space rocks. The Zovak fleet, still searching for them, had no idea where the humans had gone. They weren't used to fighting small, agile ships that could slip away so easily. Ethan's heart raced as they flew deeper into the belt. The ship shook slightly from the force of their maneuvering, but it held steady. Every move counted now. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. "We've got to make them think we're done," Ethan said, as he prepared to fire. "Once they're distracted, we hit them hard." Behind him, the crew worked silently. This was it, the moment they had trained for. The Zovak might be stronger, but they were still underestimating humanity's ability to surprise. Resolute took its position. It was clear to the crew, this was their only shot. If they did this right, they could change the tide of the battle. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. This part sets up the strategy, showcasing humanity's resourcefulness and courage, while introducing the Zovak's overconfidence and setting the stage for the upcoming battle. The tension builds as Ethan and his crew prepare to face their powerful enemies in an unexpected. The Zovak fleet hovered over Earth, their massive ships casting dark shadows across the stars. Commander Vector's flagship, the Vector Prime, led the charge. His fleet was confident in its overwhelming power. Earth's defenses, as far as the Zovak knew, were weak nothing compared to the might of the Empire. They believed it would be an easy victory, but deep inside the asteroid belt, hidden behind towering rocks and craters, the crew of the Resolute was waiting. Their mission was simple: survive. And if they were lucky, they might even pull off the impossible: defeat the Zovak. Ethan Hayes stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the view screen. He knew the Zovak wouldn't stop until they had destroyed Earth, and it was up to him and his crew to make sure that didn't happen. "Ready, everyone?" Ethan's voice was steady, but inside his heart was racing. They were about to do something dangerous. The odds were against them, but he had confidence in his crew's ability to think on their feet. "We're ready," Sir Lieutenant Margot replied, her fingers flying over the control panel. "Shields at full power. All systems are go." "Good," Ethan said. "Once we make our move, there's no going back. We have one shot at this." In the darkness of the asteroid field, the Resolute sat silently, camouflaged by the rocks and debris around them. The crew held their breath, waiting. They could see the Zovak fleet moving closer, ships shining like metal giants in the darkness. The Zovak, however, had no idea what was waiting for them. They were too focused on their task to crush the tiny human threat. They were certain that humanity would bow to their superior power. And they weren't looking for any tricks. They must be hiding somewhere, Commander Vector muttered, scanning the stars around them. Find them. His officers worked quickly, trying to locate the human ship on their radar. There's nothing, sir. They've disappeared. Vector frowned. Impossible. Ship that small can't just vanish. Keep searching. It's on the Resolute. Ethan's crew watched the Zovac fleet pass by, their ship so close that the humans could hear the hum of their engines. They were close. Too close. Ethan clenched his fists, then gave the order. Now, fire on the lead ship, Lieutenant Margot. Hit the button, and in an instant, the human ship fired its first shot. A burst of energy shot out from the Resolute's weapon system, striking the lead Zovac ship, the Vector Prime, in the side. The shot was quick, precise, and far more powerful than the Zovac had expected. The Zovac ship rocked with the impact. Sparks flew from the side, and part of its outer hull began to smoke. For a moment, there was confusion. The crew of the Resolute could see the chaos unfold. The Zovac didn't know what hit them. It underestimated the humans, and now they were feeling the consequences. Target their communication systems. Ethan ordered. We need to make sure they can't warn the rest of the fleet. The crew worked quickly. Corporal Sarah Diaz and her team targeted the communication array on the flagship. Within seconds, the systems began to fail. The Zovac were scrambling. They had no idea who had attacked them or how. We've got their comms, Sarah called. Out. A grin crossing her face. They can't communicate with the rest of the fleet anymore. Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but there was no time to waste. Now, we get out of here. Full speed ahead. With that, the Resolute turned and shot toward the asteroid field again, weaving through the rocks at breakneck speed. The Zovac were momentarily stunned, but their massive ships quickly regrouped, firing back at the small human ship. Direct hit, Margot shouted, her eyes wide. What? We've lost shield strength in the aft section. Ethan gritted his teeth. Gripping the controls, we've got to keep moving. Don't stop. They'll chase us down, but we need to keep them confused. The crew worked frantically as the Resolute dodged another attack. Sparks flew from the consoles as the ship shook. From the force of the blast, but it held together. The humans weren't going down without a fight. We can't outrun them forever, Lieutenant Margot warned, her voice strained. They're faster, and they have more firepower. We're in trouble, not if we keep them guessing, Ethan replied, eyes focused. We've got the element of surprise, and that's all we need. In the control room, the crew was a well-oiled machine. Each member knew their role, working together as they always had. Their training, their unity, was the only thing that could help them survive. The Zovac might have superior technology, but the humans had one thing the Zovac didn't. Heart. Ethan watched as the Zovac ships continued their relentless pursuit. The Resolute was fast, but even it couldn't outrun the firepower of the massive Zovac warships. Still, he refused to give up. He couldn't. Not after everything humanity had fought for. The battle was far from over. And the Zovac were starting to figure out that the humans weren't just trying to escape, they were trying to win.
Ow.
The Zovac warlords had thought they would crush the humans easily. Instead, they found themselves in a battle for their lives, facing an enemy that was relentless, strategic, and resourceful. We've got one more trick, Ethan said, voice low as he glanced at the tactical display. Prepare for a decoy? Margot looked confused. A decoy? Trust me, Ethan replied with a grin. It's our last chance. They quickly activated a small, unmanned drone from the back of the ship. It was set to mimic the Resolute's energy readings. The Zovac would never expect it, and it was their best shot at buying more time. With one last command, the drone was released into the vastness of space, headed directly toward the Zovac flagship. The Zovac ships immediately locked onto the decoy, thinking it was the Resolute. The moment they opened fire, Ethan ordered his crew to take full advantage. Now, he shouted, full power to the engines. Get us out of here. As the Zovac fleet turned their attention to the decoy, the Resolute shot off in the opposite direction, moving fast through the asteroid field, once again disappearing from the Zovac's radar. The plan had worked. For a brief moment, the crew of the Resolute allowed themselves to breathe. They had survived their first encounter with the Zovac, and they had proven something. The humans weren't a threat that could be ignored. They weren't. As strong as the Zovac, but they were clever, and they were determined. As the Resolute flew deeper into the asteroid belt, Ethan smiled, his grip loosening on the controls. This was just the beginning. They weren't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. This part brings the first major battle to life, showcasing the creativity and determination of humanity in the face of overwhelming odds. It keeps the tension high, highlighting the underdog status of the humans while giving them a surprising victory. The human ship, the Resolute, darted through the asteroid field, its small form barely visible against the vast expanse of space. Behind it, the massive Zovac fleet searched desperately for any sign of their enemy. The decoy had worked. The humans had slipped away, but the Zovac were not fools. They would keep searching, and sooner or later they would find them. Ethan Hayes stood at the helm of the Resolute, his eyes locked on the stars ahead. The battle was far from over. The first attack had been successful, but the Zovac were still out there, and they would come back with everything they had. Heart raced as he thought about what came next. The human ship was faster, but it wasn't invincible. The odds were still stacked against them. "Can't keep running forever," Lieutenant Margot said, her voice strained. "They'll catch us sooner or later." Ethan turned to face his crew, all of them staring at him, waiting for the next move. "We're not going to run forever," he said quietly. "We'll fight." The words felt heavy in the air, but there was no doubt in his mind. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something bigger. "We're fighting to show the galaxy that humanity could stand up against any threat, no matter how powerful." "Sarah," Ethan said, turning to the tactical officer. "What's the status of the fleet?" Sarah Diaz studied the screen in front of her. "Zovac have regrouped, but they're still disoriented. They don't know where we are, and they've split into smaller groups to cover more ground. That gives us a chance to strike." Ethan nodded. "We need to make them pay for underestimating us. The first hit was a warning, but now we need to hit them where it hurts." "Where do we start?" Margot asked. Ethan thought for a moment, his mind racing through the possibilities. The Zovac were powerful, but they were arrogant, and arrogance had a way of blinding even the most skilled warriors. The humans had to exploit that. "We'll go after their weakest link," Ethan said. "We know the flagship, the Vector Prime, is their most powerful ship, but it's also their most important. We can cripple it. We'll force them to. Retreat." He turned to Sarah. "Can we get a lock on their shields?" She nodded. "The flagship is heavily shielded, but there are weak spots along the edges. If we can hit it with everything we've got, we might be able to punch through." Ethan clenched his jaw. This was it. Zovac had underestimated humanity, and now the humans had a chance to turn the tide. "Prepare the weapons. We're going in." The crew quickly went to work, preparing the Resolute for the next phase of the battle. The ship was small and nimble, but it wasn't designed for sustained combat. It had been modified with human ingenuity, but it still had its limits. Ethan knew that if they were going to make it through this, they had to be quick, precise, and relentless. "Stay focused," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about winning a battle. This is about sending a message. Humanity will not be ignored." The Resolute moved into position, its engines powering up as the crew prepared. For the next strike, the Zovac fleet was still scattered, but they were closing in. Ethan's eyes scanned the space ahead of them, watching as the Zovac flagship loomed large in the distance. The massive warship was a towering monument to Zovac. Power, but it was also a symbol of their arrogance. And that arrogance was about to cost them. "Here we go," Margot said, her hand steady on the controls. "They're getting closer." Ethan gripped the armrest of his seat, watching as the Zovac fleet moved in for the kill. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in almost every way, but they had something the Zovac didn't: determination. The Zovac could destroy them, but they couldn't crush their spirit. "Now," Ethan shouted. The Resolute launched forward, its engines roaring as it shot toward the Zovac flagship. The crew fired the ship's weapons with precision, targeting The weak points in the Vector Prime shields, the first shot hit its mark, causing a ripple in the shields, but the ship's defenses held. The Zovac flagship returned fire, a blast so powerful that the Resolute shook under the impact. The shields flickered but held, just barely. "We can't take many more of those," Margot said, her voice tight with worry. "We don't need to take more," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving the view screen. "We just need one." The Resolute flew around the flagship, darting in and out of its line of sight. The Zovac were trying to lock on, but the human ship was too fast, too unpredictable. Ethan watched the ship's energy levels, carefully monitoring the power supply. They didn't have a lot of time. The Resolute couldn't take many more hits. "Fire again," Ethan shouted. This time, the blast hit its target a weak spot in the flagship's shield. The energy surged through the ship, causing the shields to flicker and crack. The Vector Prime shuddered, and for a moment it seemed like the Zovac flagship might fall. But just as quickly, the shields repaired themselves. "We've got to keep going," Sarah urged. "It's working. We just need more power." Ethan nodded, eyes narrowing. He could see the Vector Prime shields weakening just enough. For the humans to get through, the Zovac were losing their composure. It expected a quick victory, but instead, they were facing a fight unlike any they had imagined. The Resolute pushed forward again, its weapons firing with everything they had. The Zovac flagship's shields flared under the assault, and this time they didn't recover. The next blast struck true, ripping through the shield and damaging the Vector Prime's hull. The flagship groaned, and for the first time the Zovac realized that the humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The Zovac fleet seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to do next. Vector, the commander of the fleet, stared at the damage to his flagship in disbelief. "No, ... This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice thick with anger. But it was happening. The humans, against all odds, were proving that they were a force to be reckoned with. Ethan stood tall, his eyes fixed on the view screen. "We've got them on the ropes," he said, his voice steady. "Now let's finish this." The crew of the Resolute worked together as one, pushing the ship to its limits. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the humans had a real chance at victory. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to show the galaxy that humanity could stand up against any threat, no matter how powerful. And in that moment, the tide had turned. The Zovac had underestimated humanity, and they were about to pay the price, as part shows. The humans taking a bold step toward victory, using their creativity and determination to strike at the heart of the Zovac fleet. The tension rises as the humans hit back, giving the reader a sense that the battle is far from over, but there is hope for the underdog. The Resolute trembled under the constant barrage of enemy fire. The Zovac fleet, now fully aware of the human threat, had stopped hesitating. They were coming at full force, intent on wiping out the small human ship that had the audacity to challenge them. Ethan Hayes, standing firm at the helm, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The humans had made a mark, but the war was far from over. "Can't keep dodging forever," Lieutenant Margot said, her voice tight with urgency. "We need a real plan, or we won't make it out of this." Ethan glanced at the view screen, where the Zovac fleet loomed large in the distance. Their ships were massive, each one a floating fortress of weapons and power. The humans, in comparison, were like ants trying to fight giants. Yet Ethan believed in his crew. They had come this far, and they had no intention of giving up now. He took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. The Resolute was fast, but even it couldn't outrun the Zovac forever. Their guns were stronger, their ships larger, but the humans had something the Zovac couldn't predict. "Resilience," Sarah, Ethan said, turning to the tactical officer. "Can we disable their weapon systems?" Sarah Diaz studied her console for a moment, her fingers flying over the keys. "It's possible. If we can get close enough, I can target their power cores. It'll disrupt their weapons, but it'll also make us a prime target. We'll be in the line of fire." Ethan nodded. It was risky, but there was no choice. "Do it. We need to level the playing field." With a single command, Sarah locked on to the nearest Zovac warship's power core. The Resolute darted forward, weaving between asteroids and debris, avoiding the deadly fire from the Zovac ships. Every move had to be perfect, every calculation precise. Ethan felt the ship shudder again as another blast hit the shields. The damage was starting to show. The human ship wasn't designed for this kind of fight, but it had held together longer than anyone had expected. "Shields are weakening," Margot reported, her voice strained. "We can't take much more of this." "Keep moving," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Sarah, get ready to fire. We need to hit them hard." The Resolute surged forward, its engines pushing to the limit. The Zovac ships loomed closer, their massive guns aimed right at the human vessel. The crew's tension was palpable as they dodged another barrage of fire. Ethan gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white. They were on the edge now. One wrong move, and they'd be finished. "Target locked," Sarah said, her fingers poised over the fire button. "Ready to." "Fire on your command," Ethan gave the order with a sharp breath. "Fire." A brilliant flash of light erupted from the Resolute as it unleashed its energy blast. The beam struck the Zovac ship dead center, tearing through its shields and into its power core. The enemy warship groaned, and for a moment, everything went. Still, then, a massive explosion rippled through the Zovac ship, sending debris flying into space. The blast left a glowing trail of destruction in its wake. "We hit them," Sarah shouted. "Their weapons are offline." The crew of the Resolute breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had done it. The Zovac flagship was crippled. Humans had finally gained the upper hand, even if just for a moment. But the victory was short-lived. Remaining Zovac ships turned their fire on the Resolute, their anger and frustration palpable. The human ship was fast, but it was vulnerable. And now the Zovac were determined to make them pay. "Brace for impact?" Margot shouted as another blast rocked the Resolute. The shields flickered, then held, but the damage was mounting. The ship shuddered, and the lights dimmed momentarily. Ethan could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on them. They were still outnumbered, and the Zovac wouldn't stop until they had destroyed every last human. "Can we fight back?" Margot asked, her voice tight with determination. Ethan's mind raced. "We can't fight them, Hedden, but we can make them. Fight us on our terms." He quickly issued new orders. "Get us closer to their fleet, but stay behind the asteroid belt. We'll use the terrain to our advantage." Margot nodded, taking control of the ship with expert precision. The Resolute surged forward, weaving between the asteroid fields, using the debris as cover. The Zovac ships, though large and powerful, weren't built for tight turns and evasive maneuvers. They began to fall into disarray as they tried to keep up with the agile human ship. "We're in position," Margot called out. "We can hit. They're engines now, but we need to get close." Ethan clenched his jaw. They were in range. But if they missed their shot, the Zovac would turn their attention back to them and destroy them without hesitation. This was their last chance. "Take the shot," Ethan commanded. The Resolute fired again, and this time it hit the mark. The blast struck the Zovac ship's engines, causing a massive explosion. The ship lurched and began to drift aimlessly, its power offline. It was another victory, but the humans still weren't safe. The remaining Zovac ships turned their fire on the Resolute with renewed fury. "We're out of options," Margot said, her voice filled with urgency. "Finish us off if we don't act fast?" Ethan looked at his crew, all of them determined, none of them willing to back down. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity could not be ignored, that humanity had the will to fight back and win. "Full power to the engines," Ethan ordered. "We're going to finish this." With a sudden burst of speed, the Resolute shot toward the remaining Zovac fleet faster than they could react. They were small and vulnerable, but the Zovac didn't expect them to take this kind of risk. They fired their remaining weapons in a desperate attempt to stop the human ship, but it was too late. The Resolute darted through the remaining Zovac ships, striking their power cores with precision. The Zovac ships exploded one by one, unable to keep up with the human ship's unpredictable movements. As the final enemy ship fell, the crew of the Resolute let out a collective cheer, but the battle wasn't over. Zovak were still out there, regrouping, and the humans knew they had to be ready for whatever came next. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had proven that they could stand up to the galaxy's most powerful empire and win. Ethan stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest, but his resolve unwavering. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're not done yet." And with that, the Resolute sped off into the stars, ready to face whatever came next. The Zovak had learned an important lesson today. Never underestimate humanity. This part showcases the intense, desperate battle as the humans push back against the Zovak Empire. It highlights their resourcefulness and determination while showing that despite their victories, the fight is far from over. The tension and uncertainty remain high, keeping the story engaging as the humans continue their fight for survival. Ask ChatGPT. The stars were quiet again, but the tension on the Resolute was thick. The battle had been intense, and though they had managed to strike a serious blow to the Zovak fleet, the crew knew that the war was far from over. The Zovak weren't just going to give up because they lost a few ships. Ethan Hayes stood at the helm, staring into the black void of space. His mind raced, weighing the cost of what they had just been through. "Captain," Lieutenant Margot's voice broke through the silence. "The Zovak fleet is regathering. We've dealt them a serious blow, but they'll come back. They always do." Ethan nodded slowly. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we can't rely on that. We need to think bigger." Sarah Diaz, the tactical officer, was busy at her console, eyes darting across the data. "I'm picking up multiple Zovak signals. They're preparing to regroup at the edge of the asteroid field. They'll be ready in hours." "Not enough." "Time for us to get back to Earth," Margot added. "And we're low on supplies." The Resolute had been battered. Its hull had taken more hits than anyone had expected it to, and now its energy levels were dangerously low. The human crew was exhausted. There had been no time to rest, no time to think, and now they were about to face the full fury of the Zovak fleet again. Ethan took a deep breath, pushing the thoughts of exhaustion aside. The humans had already proven they could survive. Now, they needed to do more than survive. They needed to win. "Prepare the weapons," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "We've got one more chance to hit them before they regroup. We're going to take out their command ship, the Vector Prime." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They all knew that taking down the Vector Prime was the key. Without it, the Zovak fleet would lose its command structure. But it wasn't going to be easy. The Vector Prime was heavily guarded, and the Zovak had learned from their previous mistakes. They wouldn't be caught off guard again. Ethan glanced around the room. His crew was battered, tired, but still willing to fight. "Listen up, this is it. We've come a long way, and we're not stopping now. The Zovak think they can wipe us out, but we're going to show them something they never expected. Humanity fights with everything it has, and we're not going to back down." "We're with you, sir," Margot said, her voice full of determination. "Then let's make it count," Ethan replied. The Resolute moved deeper into the asteroid field using the same tactics they had before. It was their best chance to approach the Zovak fleet undetected. The crew worked quickly and efficiently, their training and teamwork showing in every action. They couldn't afford any mistakes. Every moment counted. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "Targeting the Vector Prime. Their shields are still at full power. We need to break through those shields," Ethan said. "Margot, can we get close enough for a direct hit?" "It's risky," Margot replied, "but it's the only shot we've got. If we move in fast, we might be able to catch them off." "Guard, then let's do it." The ship maneuvered expertly through the field of asteroids. The Resolute was small and agile, making it difficult for the Zovak to track. The enemy fleet was preparing for the next phase of their attack, and they didn't see the human ship until it was too late. "Full power to the engines," Ethan ordered. The Resolute surged forward, weaving in and out of the debris. The Zovak ships, large and sluggish, tried to lock onto the human ship, but it was too fast. A Resolute approached the Vector Prime quickly, staying close to the asteroid field for cover. "Ready to fire?" Sarah called. "We're in range." "Do it," Ethan said. The Resolute fired its main cannon, and the shot hit the Vector Prime's shield. It shuddered, and for a moment the massive ship seemed to stagger. The Zovac crew didn't have time to react before another blast hit, cracking the shields wide open. "Direct hit to their core," Sarah shouted. "Shields are down. Our weapons are offline." Ethan's heart raced. They'd done it. But it wasn't over. The Vector Prime was still a massive threat, and they were still in range. "Had to move quickly. Get out of here," Margot yelled as the Vector Prime fired back. The energy beam shot across space, just missing the Resolute's hull. "We can't stay too long," Ethan said. "Keep moving, Margot. Get us back into the asteroid field." As the Resolute darted away, the remaining Zovac ships began to regroup. But the damage had been done. The Vector Prime shields were down, and its weapons were offline. Without it, the rest of the Zovac fleet was lost. The humans had struck a decisive blow. But even with the damage, the Zovac weren't giving up. They were still coming, and now the humans had to face them in their weakened state. Back on the bridge, the crew stood in tense silence as the ship continued to race through the asteroid field. The Zovac were relentless, and even though they had knocked out their command ship, the fleet still had power, and they would not stop until they had wiped out the human threat. "We've done what we can," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "Now it's time to finish this." Margot nodded. "We'll fight until the last breath." The Resolute continued to move, its engines pushing forward, the crew ready for whatever came next. They had already defied the odds and proven that humanity could stand up to even the mightiest of enemies. Now, they would show the galaxy that humanity would never back down, no matter the cost. Ethan knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. The Zovac had underestimated them, and now they were going to pay the price. The Resolute sailed through the stars, its crew united in purpose, ready for the final chapter of this battle. The humans had shown that they were not to be ignored. The Zovac had learned an important lesson: ever underestimate humanity. This part shows the human crew pushing forward with courage and resourcefulness, demonstrating that they can stand up against the Zovac despite their inferior numbers. The battle intensifies as the crew prepares for the next phase, and their determination shines through in the face of overwhelming odds.